Good morning, and I want to welcome the leadership of the Disabled American Veterans to the hearing today. We are honored to have you here. Congress relies on the DAV and your team of advocates in Washington to keep us apprised of how we're meeting the needs of veterans. I know that addressing toxic exposure in a comprehensive manner has been a long-standing issue for the DAV. It is a long-standing priority for me, too. Last year, I vowed to work across the aisle to deliver bipartisan, comprehensive toxic exposure reform. After consulting with the VA on a path forward and my friend, Ranking Member Jerry Moran, we have developed a three-phased approach for getting this done. That includes offering life-saving VA health care to more combat veterans, including those suffering from conditions caused by toxic exposures. It also includes improved training on toxic exposures for VA employees and more investments into research. And together, we continue to work closely with the VA to build upon their efforts to establish an improved presumption process that is more fair, more transparent, and more timely for our veterans. And the time has long passed for us to provide benefits to previous generations of toxic exposed veterans, including the establishment of new presumptions of service connection. We started this fight, and together we will finish it. I also want to thank the DAV for their input in support of my Bipartisan Service Members and Veterans Empowerment and Support Act, which would improve access to care and benefits for MST survivors, many of whom were wrongly denied. Ranking Member Moran and his team have been great partners on this bill, and I'm hopeful it will pass the Senate very soon. In addition, mental health and suicide prevention must remain a top priority. We need to expand mental health care access for more veterans and increase VA's capacity to meet those needs. This means strengthening the Veterans Crisis Line through the Bipartisan Reach for Veterans Act and making sure VA is well-resourced to provide both inpatient and outpatient mental health care, including the highly trained staff to deliver it, through the post-9/11 Veterans Mental Health Care Improvement Act, another top priority of mine. Commander Marshall and team, we obviously have a lot left to do, and your voice is invaluable as we prioritize our efforts. We want to thank you for your work that you do every single day on behalf of disabled veterans across this nation. And we stand by to hear your marching orders. I just want to close with one thing. I've always said in these sessions before, and I will say it again today, this committee takes its direction from the veteran service organizations and the people you represent. Your testimony here is very, very important as we schedule the remaining agenda in this Congress. And I appreciate you being here. And I also appreciate my friend Joe Parsetich, who happens to be watching this today from the great state of Montana. Thanks, gentlemen, ladies. With that, I'll turn it over to Chairman Takano for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Senator Tester. It is an honor to join all the members of the House and Senate committees on Veterans Affairs virtually and in person to hear directly from the National Commander and representatives of the disabled American veterans. I would like to welcome all DAV members who have joined us online today as well. And a special hello to my friend Richard Valdez in the Inland Empire of California. The opportunity to hear from our VSO partners is incredibly important to me. I was encouraged to see the overwhelming support that DAV and other VSOs provided last Thursday in a letter to House leadership supporting the Honoring Our PACT Act. This is a very exciting and busy week where we are going to debate and pass the PACT Act. And I want to personally thank you for the tremendous support you have provided during this process. I would like to submit the letter from our VSO partners into the record if there's no objection.
Without objection.
I'd also like to express my thanks to Senator Tester for his continued efforts to work with me on this issue. Our bipartisan bill finally provides access to VA health care to over 3.5 million veterans exposed to toxic substances. It requires that VA presumes veterans were exposed to toxic substances rather than placing the burden on veterans to prove this link themselves. Vietnam veterans waited more than 40 years for benefits related to Agent Orange exposure because of Congress's piecemeal solutions. Toxic exposed veterans have held up their part of the pact, and they deserve our action. This week, we are keeping our promise, and I look forward to continuing to work with the Senate to make this the law of the land. VSO partners like DAV represent veterans and their families at all stages of life and service. Hearing from these partners allows the committees, the opportunity to hear directly about what is most important to your members and how we can be of service to our nation's veterans. In the last Congress, together, we secured several important wins for veterans, including passing the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act, the Deborah Sampson Act, the Veterans Compact Act, and the Commander Scott Hannon Act. I'm very proud of these accomplishments, but they are only the beginning. We need to build on these achievements and continue our fight for better health care and benefits in this Congress and beyond. Reading your testimony, it is clear your priorities align with mine. My committee's top priorities for this Congress include creating a more inclusive and welcoming VA, building equity for an increasingly diverse veteran community, reducing veteran suicide, addressing toxic exposure, ensuring student veterans receive quality education, advocating for women veterans, modernizing VA, supporting VA's long-term care facilities, improving VA's management and oversight, and ensuring our legislative accomplishments are implemented effectively. Our diverse veteran community includes higher numbers of women, LGBTQ+, Black, Asian, Hispanic, and Native veterans than ever before. It is our country's diversity that strengthens our armed forces and veteran communities, and minority veterans deserve to feel safe and welcome when they enter through its doors, with outreach, programming, and solutions that address their unique needs. Now, additionally, VA must acknowledge the diversity of its workforce to address systematic discrimination in the workplace. We must ensure that health care and benefits are fairly and equitably distributed to all eligible veterans, and to do that, we must also ensure a safe and equitable workplace for VA employees. Our work to prevent veteran suicide continues. We must relentlessly pursue well-researched and scientifically sound policies that are proven to prevent suicide. We have big goals, but I know that with your support and insight here today, along with the support of the administration, we will be able to deliver on them. We will be able to deliver on them and fulfill the promises we've made to our nation's veterans. I look forward to hearing your testimony today. I fully associate myself with the sentiments of Chairman Tester in regard to the absolute paramount importance of your testimony and the situation of our VSOs in terms of the respect that they carry with the American people. Your word means a lot here on Capitol Hill. We are honored to hear from you today. I thank you for your continued advocacy and your support for the veterans community. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. Ranking Member Moran.
Chairman Tester, thank you very much. It's good to see Ranking Member Bost and Chairman Takano for us to be back together in this setting, and welcome to our DAV witnesses this morning and all who are watching here and at home. Say a particular hello to the DAV members tuning in today from Kansas, and I appreciate the opportunity last night to spend time in my office with Kansas Commander Karen Hansen, Junior Vice Commander Ron Boykins, Senior Vice Commander James Bunker, and Adjutant Eric Owens. And Commander, it was a pleasure to spend time with you and your team as well. I want to thank the DAV leaders for being here today in person, and thank each of you for your great passion and expertise that you have in supporting veterans, their families, and our survivors. We are accomplishing a lot working together in recent years. Legislation to help reduce veteran suicide, improve access and choice in health care, resources to improve disability claims and appeals process, educational benefits, protections and expansions, and flexibility to assist veterans through COVID-19 pandemic. I expect these bipartisan efforts to continue in the second half of this Congress, and I know DAV will continue to be an important advocate and resource as we continue to work on measures addressing toxic exposure and the disability claims backlog. As most of you all know, however, the real measure of success is not simply passing legislation. I often tell people who thank me for my efforts, I wish you could thank me for my results. And we need to ensure the effective execution of laws that we have passed and seeing concrete results that are efficient, effective, in the best interest of America's veterans. This is especially true when we discuss how to appropriately address toxic exposure, both on the healthcare side and the disability compensation side. I want to thank Chairman Tester and Ranking Member Bost for our work on the Healthcare for Burn Pits Veterans Act, and I look forward to working with all four corners on a solution that is in the best interest of all veterans. Commander Marshall's DAV's advocacy and partnership will be vital in these continued discussions and relationships as we work to get issues like toxic exposure, MST reforms, and disability compensation improvements across the finish line in the coming months and years. Before I yield back, I want to thank all of the U.S. service members currently serving in NATO countries, those back home at the 1st Infantry Division who are in Romania and Poland, those who've been recently deployed to the region. They and the people of Ukraine are in my thoughts, in our thoughts and prayers. And in conclusion, Commander, I thank you for your testimony and our friendship, and I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Next up virtually, we have Ranking Member Bost.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm glad to be here with you today to join in with Chairman Tester, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Moran, and as we move forward, first off, let me say welcome to all of those Illinois veterans that are from DAV that are here with us today. Let me also say thank you to all the veterans. As many of you know, I am a veteran myself, the son and grandson of Korean War veterans, the nephew of a Vietnam veteran who had experienced the ultimate oxymoron, and that is, most of you veterans understand that. That is friendly fire. He is 100% disabled, but doing very, very well. I also, my son is a lieutenant colonel, and my grandson is a lance corporal in the Corps at this time. So Semper Fi to all of you out there that are Marines. And let me tell you that as we're moving forward together as a four corners, I want to associate my remarks with Ranking Member Moran on the fact that we need to work together on the toxic exposures to come to a bill that we can move and actually get across the finish line and actually get it to the president's desk so that we can provide as much as we possibly can for our veterans, and I will strive to do that. Let me also say that, I want to associate my remarks as well with the chairman, Takano, on the fact of why we need to make sure we focus that the VA provides for our women veterans. They're the fastest growing group of veterans, and we need to make sure that the services that are provided are beneficial to all, and that everyone feels comfortable in entering the VA and dealing with any VA issues that are out there. We look forward to having the DAV have testimony today. We thank you for the leadership that's here to give testimony to us, and we're looking forward to that testimony. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Bost. And now I will turn it over to sorry about that, to Chairman Takano for his introduction of the DAV National Commander.
Well, I'm pleased to introduce DAV's National Commander, Andrew Marshall, who was elected to lead the 1 million member DAV, Disabled American Veterans, at their national convention in Orlando, Florida last August. Commander Marshall is a service-disabled combat veteran of the Vietnam War. He was twice wounded and medically retired from the U.S. Army after receiving the Bronze Star, Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, and Army Commendation Medal with V device. After leaving the military, he devoted most of his life to serving his fellow veterans, working for DAV for 41 years. He retired from DAV as a National Service Office supervisor in St. Petersburg, Florida. Was also assigned to the DAV Judicial Appeals Office in Washington, D.C., and was one of DAV's first national area supervisors. During his career, he has had a lasting impact on countless veterans' lives. As supervisor of DAV's National Service Office in Bay Pines, Florida, Commander Marshall initiated a claim on behalf of a veteran that ultimately resulted in a change to Department of Veterans Affairs policy by allotting multiple clothing allowances for amputees and other severely disabled veterans. He has been a member of DAV since 1975 and has been an active leader at the chapter, state, and national levels. He is a past commander for the DAV Department of Florida and currently serves as the state's adjutant and executive director. He also served for 3 years on the Florida Veteran Advisory Council. Commander Marshall and his wife Susan, who is here with us today, and who continues to be his biggest supporter, live in Palm Harbor, Florida. It is my privilege to introduce DAV National Commander Andrew Marshall.
Congressman Takano, thank you for that kind introduction. Chairman Tester and members of the Committees on Veterans Affairs, thank you for providing me the opportunity to present the 2022 legislative program of DAV, Disabled American Veterans, an organization of more than 1 million members, forever changed in wartime service. My written statement thoroughly details DAV's key legislative priorities for the 117th Congress and reports on our many programs and accomplishments. So today, I'll just highlight some of our most crucial policy goals. I want to start by introducing my DAV colleagues joining me today. National Adjutant Mark Burgess, National Headquarters Executive Director Barry Jesenowski, Washington Headquarters Executive Director Randy Reese, National Service Director Jim Marsalek, National Legislative Director Joy Elam, National Voluntary Service Director John Kleindienst. Though they couldn't be here today in person, many of DAV's members are together watching this hearing from our annual Midwinter Conference just outside Washington, D.C. I want to recognize the many DAV leaders who have been vital to our organization's mission over the course of many years, including senior and junior vice commanders and leaders of the DAV Auxiliary. I also wish to extend my gratitude to our National Executive Committee and our National Legislative Interim Committee, as well as my Chief of Staff, Thomas Ayala, for all their support. Of course, I want to recognize our many dedicated DAV members across the country who are supporting us from their hometowns. And finally, I wish to thank my wife, Susan, who remains my most steadfast supporter and partner. Mr. Chairman, I am a combat-wounded Army veteran of the Vietnam War. I served as an airborne infantryman with the Marical Division in the Khe Sanh Valley in December 1970. But after being wounded by friendly fire, I was transferred to the 173rd Airborne Brigade. On patrol in January 1971, I was wounded again when I stepped on an IED. The explosion resulted in extensive damage to my left leg and foot, and I spent the next 15 months recovering at Walter Reed. 4 years later, I began working for DAV as a National Service Officer and spent the next 4 decades advocating for my fellow veterans so they could have access to the health care and benefits they had earned. Early in my career, I met a Vietnam veteran named Tom who desperately needed help. Like so many, he struggled with PTSD and the lingering physical and psychological tolls of combat. His disabilities and demons became so severe he could no longer work. And after VA denied his claim, Tom began contemplating taking his own life. I knew he was particularly vulnerable to self-harm and accompanied him to a meeting with his Vet Center counselor. DV took on his claim, appealed, and ultimately won, providing him with additional financial support. With each small step, I could see the weight lift from Tom's shoulders. And after VA acknowledged his trauma and granted him the benefits and care he needed, Tom never considered taking his own life again. Tom was saved by the right combination of life-saving factors, but there are far too many situations that have ended in tragedy. Mr. Chairman, veterans' need for mental health services have grown substantially following 2 decades of wartime service. Today, VA's crisis line receives hundreds of thousands of calls, text, and chat messages annually. In addition, VA's vet centers have seen a 35% uptick in the past 5 years. As these needs continue to grow, it's critical that Congress provide VA with all the mental health resources, staffing, and support necessary to prevent suicide. Mr. Chairman, the VA Mission Act was designed to increase VA's capacity to deliver care both inside the VA and in the community. We know that, that most enrolled veterans prefer to receive their care directly from the VA, and clinical studies continue to show that the quality of care provided by VA is as good as or better than that provided by the private sector. That's why it's critical that VA remain the primary provider and coordinator of health care for enrolled veterans, even while continuing to improve the new community care network created by the VA Mission Act. And as we have seen over the past 2 years of the pandemic, VA has been one of the most successful and reliable health care systems in the nation, providing timely access to care for more than 9 million enrolled veterans. VA also provided help to other healthcare systems and non-veterans under its 4th mission to provide support to the nation during national emergencies, disasters, and wars. At the same time, VA is a national leader in medical care and training clinical professionals. That's why it is so important to maintain a robust VA healthcare system that is able to deliver a full spectrum of care. Mr. Chairman, a key section of the VA Mission Act was the creation of an asset and infrastructure review to develop and implement a plan to modernize and realign VA's healthcare infrastructure for the future. In just a couple of weeks, VA will put forward its facility recommendations. In order for the process to be successful, VA must provide complete transparency of the data and assumptions used to make their facility recommendations, particularly the market assessments. With more and more veterans turning to VA, Congress must ensure it has the right healthcare infrastructure in the right locations to meet the rising demand for care. Mr. Chairman, as the VA works to increase its capacity to meet the physical and mental health care needs for those who served, it must continue to create an environment that is free from harassment. We must truly welcome all veterans. The VA has made notable strides to reduce harassment, including the introduction of bystander intervention for training staff and veterans. Congress must continue to oversee the implementation of VA's zero tolerance policy for harassment at all VA facilities. We also look to Congress to ensure that veterans who have experienced military sexual trauma are able to receive the benefits and services they deserve. For these veterans, fighting to prove their case to the VA, sometimes for years, takes a damaging emotional toll. We call on Congress to pass legislation that would codify evidentiary standards within the MST claims process, enhance communication with affected veterans, improve VBA's training and procedures, and expand mental health services for MST providers. Another way the VA supports seriously injured and ill veterans is by supporting their family caregivers. Thanks to the leadership and work of these 2 committees, the Comprehensive Caregiver Program is expanding to veterans of all eras. However, according to VA, through January 6th of this year, over 86% of these new applicants have been denied eligibility. Clearly, something is wrong. A couple of weeks ago, Secretary McDonough announced VA was undertaking a comprehensive review of the program and new eligibility regulations that went into effect last year. We call on these committees to hold oversight hearings and work with VA to ensure severely disabled veterans who rely on family caregivers get access to these life-changing benefits. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the importance of Congress taking action to address the toxic legacy of burn pits and other exposures. As a Vietnam veteran and a DAV benefits advocate for 41 years, I know the long-term negative health effects of Agent Orange. I lived through the long struggle before Congress and VA took action to recognize the damage from these toxic exposures. That struggle continues for some Vietnam veterans even today. It's long past due for VA to recognize that hypertension is associated with Agent Orange exposure. And if VA won't act, then Congress must do so through legislation. Unfortunately, the same inaction has plagued generations of veterans suffering from conditions linked to other toxic exposures like radiation, contaminated water, and burn pits. After years of work by DAV and other veterans organizations, together with good faith efforts by leaders of these committees on both sides of the aisles, Congress may finally be nearing decisive action, but only if you work together. Later this week, the House will be voting on the PACT Act, the most comprehensive legislation on burn pits and toxic exposures ever introduced. For members of the House, we urge you to vote yes on passage of this bill and to oppose any amendments that would weaken or limit this legislation. The Senate has taken critical steps towards the same goal, though with a different tactical approach. Last month, the Senate passed legislation to expand health care coverage for combat veterans, and this committee is working on at least 2 additional bills to create a legal framework and establish new presumptions related to burn pits. We urge all senators to continue working in good faith to pass the most comprehensive package of burn pit and toxic exposure bills possible in the Senate. Ultimately, it will take true bipartisanship for the House and Senate to reach a compromise on significant legislation to be approved before the end of the year. I want you all to know that DAV and our members across the country are ready to help and that we will be watching. There's precious little time to lose. Veterans' lives and well-being are truly on the line, and they deserve better. Mr. Chairman, the 1921 novel All Quiet on the Western Front captured the intense mental stress felt by soldiers during World War I, as well as the difficulty they experienced transitioning back to normal life after returning home from the front lines. Eric Marie Remarque wrote that his book would tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war. Much has changed since the time of its writing, both about war and about how we are able to care for those scarred during their time in military service. Our brave men and women need not be resigned to the fate Remarque wrote about, yet for all of our medical and scientific advances, we are still losing veterans each and every day due to their pain and despair. Together, we have the opportunity and the obligation to do better. May God continue to bless DAV, the men and women who serve this great nation, and the United States of America. Thank you.
Commander Marshall, I want to thank you for your comments, and I also want to thank all your conference attendees that have to be watching this over the internet. For the folks who are asking questions here, because we're at this part of the program, I would ask you to try to keep your questions to 3 minutes because there's a lot of people here and virtually also. But I will begin now. Over the last few years, these committees have given the VA more responsibility. You've already addressed some of it. We've passed bills around caregivers expansion, around the Mission Act, the Deb Sampson Act, the John Scott Hannon Act with mental health, VBA appeals modernization, COVID-19 response in the 4th mission role, Blue Water Navy, 3 new Agent Orange conditions, the Colmary GI Bill, just to name a few. I believe you guys supported all of them. Are we giving, now we're talking about toxic exposure, which is going to add some more workload. From your perspective, and feel free to defer this question to anybody you would like on your team, but do you think we're giving the VA too much of a workload for them to handle?
Mr. Chairman, those other programs you mentioned increase the VA's workload. However, lately, by being more focused on electronic issues and programs that they now have, they did not have before, they are rating more cases than ever in their history. And toxic exposures goes back to mustard gas exposure all the way up to now. So they have been able to handle that. But I will refer additional comments to Mr. Marszalek.
Thank you, Commander. And I think the Commander answered it perfectly. I think the advancements of technology, and I think, again, working together to create more efficient methods on how to process claims is the answer. These service members made a commitment to fight for us. We need to make the commitment to fight for them and give them the benefits that they deserve. So we need to work together to create these processes so they can get the job done and they can get it done right the first time.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that brings me to toxic exposure. And Commander Marshall, can you tell me what the expansion of toxic exposure healthcare would mean for your post 9/11 membership?
It would mean that they would receive the care that they are entitled and have earned, Mr. Chairman. They would be better off and possibly save lives, save families. And again, I will refer to Mr. Marszalek.
Thank you, Commander. We know there's an estimated 3.5 million veterans that have been exposed to burn pits and even more that have been exposed to other Agent Orange radiation and contaminated water. Many are struggling now without access to these benefits. So it's time now to make the decision and take care of them.
Phase 3 of the bill, the bills that we're working on the Senate side is going to deal with presumptive exposure. Can you explain why presumptive exposure is so important for your members, Commander Marshall, or who else?
Thank you, Commander. Yes, thank you, Senator. It's so important that they don't have to fight. I mean, to me, you have to enable the concession of exposure in order, so these veterans who served in these combat zones and these war zones, we need to be able to tell them, hey, if you have an illness associated with exposure to those burn pits, then you are eligible to come in and file for benefits and get the health care that you need. So it's very important that we define this process. We actually codify it. We know the VA is working on a new presumptive model themselves, so we still urge Congress to codify, to enact legislation that will put that into law that they must follow.
Thank you. Chairman Takano.
Thank you, Chairman Tester. Commander, as a Vietnam veteran, you know that, I know that you can appreciate the struggles that veterans have faced while waiting for VA to recognize presumptive conditions related to toxic exposure. Can you speak to the impact the passage of the PACT Act would have to the veterans you represent?
The PACT Act. Well, you know, some of them were fighting a year or two in combat. Some of them been fighting more than that, depending on their length of service. It's time to end the fights. They've earned these benefits. And I would yield to Mr. Marszalek again.
Thank you, Commander. I agree with the commander. It's time. It's time to do it. And so the PACT Act, adding the additional presumptives, the health care, hypertension as a presumptive disability, these veterans have waited long enough. It's time to take care of it now. That's why we support that bill so strongly.
Well, thank you. DAV is extremely important in supporting veterans in claims processing. With the expansion of presumptions in the PACT Act, what additional support will you need from Congress and the VA to assist you in this extremely important function?
Again, as stated previously, their technology has improved vastly in the past 5 years. Again, allowing them to rate and process more cases than ever before. And it still is increasing according to the Secretary. Mr. Marsalek?
Thank you again, Commander. I think he's spot on that the automation and the technology, we have to take advantage of those things. Do we know that the impact's going to be significant when you add additional disabilities that veterans are able to claim? Absolutely. It's going to have an impact. The backlog's going to go up. It's going to take longer to process claims. However, let's get together. Let's work out processes that work for everybody. Make it easy for veterans to come in the door and file those claims. Let's not complicate it any more than it is. Let's make it easier for them to come in the door and be able to process those claims. I know VA's working on automation already. They're piloting that process right now. So we're looking at that very closely. How does that work? What are the outcomes? And can we expand those to other potential claim conditions?
Well, thank you. Commander, I was so pleased to see you lead from the front as a VSO, talking openly about the importance of lethal means safety training and discussions. And we know that safely storing firearms at home could drop the suicide rate immediately for veterans and others living in their homes. Do you agree that VA should move swiftly to expand its safety training beyond just clinical staff to include all VA staff and contractors?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I do. As a Veterans Benefits advocate for 40-some years, you can never get too much training, no matter what profession you're in. So, for the VA to have the gun locks and distribute them free to veterans is a great stride, and will help, we hope, make it harder for them to take their own life by that means. So I ask Ms. Elam.
And I would just add, we're very pleased that VA is moving forward with that initiative, and the expansion of it is essential. We know the research indicates that the enrolled veterans that use VA services, those that do take their lives by suicide, very high percentage do that by firearms. And VA is really talking about how do we talk to our veterans to make sure everybody feels comfortable to talk about these issues when a veteran's in crisis. We want them to be safe. We want their families to be safe. And the lethal means safety is a huge part of that, of reducing suicide. It's a must, one part of their toolkit.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Moran.
Sir, thank you. Commander, thank you for your testimony that I've now heard. Yesterday, I sent a letter to the President regarding the need to fill longstanding vacancies in critical positions, leadership positions at the VA. Can you speak to how the absence of an Undersecretary for Health and Undersecretary for Benefits has impacted veterans, their dependents, health care, and benefits?
That's a good question, sir, and I will yield to our Executive Director, Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. And as you know, it's imperative that we have leadership in the right places for the very simple purpose of accountability. And what we've had in the absence of an Undersecretary for Health for more than 5 years and a void for the Undersecretary for Benefits during this administration, we're going through an actual national crisis of a pandemic, a world crisis of the pandemic. The largest integrated health system in the United States of America is leaderless. That's unconscionable. I mean, veterans deserve better than that. And the leaders at VA deserve better than that. And we have great confidence at the Veterans Health Administration, at the VA medical centers, and the VA regional office level, that we have great leaders that are doing great things for veterans. But in order to steer that ship, you have to have the top of those positions filled. It needs to be a priority for the administration, for the president, and certainly for the Department of Veterans Affairs to have leaders in place that can lead, and that this body can hold accountable for delivering on the promises being made and the laws being passed.
Mr. Reese, I thank you for your strong answer to that question. Let me follow up on this conversation about toxic exposure. As Chairman Tester indicated, we're on a pursuit of a three-phase approach to deal with toxic exposure. One of the things we learned just recently is that this administration supports establishing new presumptions. And in every instance that I know of, they have the authority to do so. That is not exactly what I took from the conversations and testimony from the Department of Veterans Affairs during Senate consideration of this legislation. So if the truth is that we don't want to wait any longer, the administration supports the utilization of the presumptions. The Department of Veterans Affairs has the legal authority to pursue those presumptions, then why would we wait for what will be a period of time before the Senate can complete its work on legislation related to toxic exposures? Isn't it now time for the focus to turn to the VA and the department to do what the administration is indicating they want done?
Thank you. Let me turn to my staff to provide a very detailed answer to your question.
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely agree. First, I think the responsibility for taking care of our nation's veterans is vested in this body. And obviously, that responsibility was delegated to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to make decisions on behalf of our nation's veterans for presumptions. And that legal authority has been established by a long-lasting framework. Unfortunately, some of the provisions of that framework has faded from the Agent Orange Act. And now we have a debate as to what should the current framework look like. And we have a discussion between a legal framework as governed by statute and regulation versus an internal framework where the Secretary of Veterans Affairs has an internal team of advisors that present to him a body of knowledge, review, and then a recommendation for presumptions, which, as you know, a pilot model is being designed now. Regardless of the pilot being successful or not, each administration can interpret those rules separately and very differently. We truly believe that this body has the ultimate responsibility to craft legislation, statute, that directs the Secretary of Veterans Affairs in regards to the execution of those functions. That has been neglected since the expiration of the Agent Orange Act. It gives a great model already in place, and we can change words and we can change standards all we want internal to the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the next administration is going to do the same thing. They'll interpret it differently, more stringently, and ultimately, regardless of what they recommend to the Secretary, let's all remember, you can say no. And while the Secretary holds a cabinet position, he's not truly the boss. OMB can say no. The President can say no. It's just too many people saying no when this chamber can say yes.
Ranking Member Boss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some paperwork here that we can take care of if at all possible, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, before I begin my question, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the statement for my friend and a fierce advocate for our veterans, Representative Gus Belarakis. He has prepared a statement that needs to be put in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Belarakis had planned to be here today and introduce Mr. Marshall. Unfortunately, he needed to lead a hearing in another subcommittee, and he was sorry and apologizes that he could not be here. With that, I'd like to ask just a few questions, if I might. I'm a little concerned. We're hearing increased concerns from veterans who cannot get timely appointments still in the VA healthcare system. And I'm also hearing that we're not being informed about options, that they're not being informed about options that are available through the Missions Act. Some of these veterans have serious conditions like cancer, where delays could cost them their lives. Are you hearing similar concerns about access to care from your members?
Personally, I receive my care, all my medical care, from the Department of Veterans Affairs at Bay Pines. I am familiar with Florida only, sir, mostly, and I have received very little complaints regarding being able to get their appointments on a timely basis. And if they do, be referred out to the private sector, there are times, sir, that the private sector takes longer than the VA to schedule them an appointment. But I will yield to our legislative director for further comments.
Ranking Member, the independent budget, which DAV has been a part of for over 30 years, also has talked about access issues. Although we're not hearing about significant delays in any large way right now, we want to make sure that all veterans can have access to quality and timely care. Access to timely care depends on resources, the resources to make sure that staff vacancies have been filled, that have been open, and it's essential that space, is available for them, and working with the community through the VA's Community Care Network. So we want to make sure that all veterans have access to care when and where they need it.
Thank you. We have heard some real concerns coming through my office. I've got a very short period of time here, but I would like to ask very quickly. I appreciate the fact, as the chairman, that that you're in support of what is being done to try to keep firearms in safe training and all of those things, because of the 20 people that are committing suicide every day. The problem is about only 6 of them are actually seeking help, and we need to make sure that they do seek help through the VA. But right now, there's a situation in our VA that's been going on for several years, and many of the veterans I talk with do not seek help from the VA because they're concerned that they would lose their Second Amendment rights under the fact that if they receive a fiduciary, they are automatically turned over to the NICS, and then their right to bear arms is taken away without going through the courts. Have you heard concerns about that as well? And I'm going to be carrying, I've got a bill out there that has not been called yet, but tries to deal with this so that they get the exact same treatment as someone who's not a veteran, in the fact that if they're a danger themselves or a danger to someone else, then the courts can get involved, but not automatically have someone, just because they receive a fiduciary from the VA, that they're going to really be not able to carry weapons or own them.
Yes, sir, I have heard that same complaint, and I will yield to our legislative director or executive director for further comment.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bosten. DAV, we have a very firm stance. Part of our Constitution speaks to the Constitution of the United States. We believe that all veterans are citizens of this country. They should have all their rights, and they should certainly have due process, regardless what that means in regards to a fiduciary or not. The simple fact that they have a fiduciary for financial purposes doesn't mean that they're incompetent for purposes of handling a firearm. So due process is the key ingredient to making sure that the jurisdiction is clear, that the Department of Veterans Affairs is not a court, and that a court is the competent authority to make those decisions.
Thank you. And I appreciate the answer to the questions. And with that, I yield back. I went over, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to both chairs. Thank you, Commander, for being here, and for all of the other people who are here. You provide a very extensive testimony, and I appreciate it very much. I think that informed decisions requires information. So you mentioned in several parts of your testimony, Commander, the need for data. The need for data. So I appreciate the support DAV has shown to my legislation with Congresswoman Brownlee, the Every Veteran Counts Act, which would help fill in some of the gaps you mentioned in your testimony and give us a more complete picture of our current veteran population. Can you talk a little bit more about the way insufficient data can be harmful, especially to minority veterans, to women, and other underserved veterans. And I'd like to also give an opportunity for your legislative director to add her comments.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question and your statement. Insufficient data is not good for any government agency, any private business, large or small. And I will yield to our legislative director, Ms. Elam, for that.
We appreciate your efforts in that regard. Data is essential. With VA serving an increasingly diverse patient population, we want to make sure that no one's unique needs are left unmet. And that will require to have good data. We know that VA can do that with research, and that is so important to be able to back good legislation that's needed. We see the gaps where they exist, whether that's veterans that we have poor health outcomes. We need to know why, if it's based on race, ethnicity, some LGBTQ veterans, if we don't have the data and information, their provider can't provide them the care that they really truly need by asking the pertinent questions and also addressing those unique needs. So we completely appreciate that, understand the need for it, and appreciate that, those efforts in that regard with the legislation.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the importance of disaggregated data. So we need to continue to encourage the VA, which has the data. They just have to provide it in a way that will enable what I would call informed decisions, because we are talking about a VA population that is not monolithic by any stretch of the imagination. So thank you for your support. Hawaii has been struggling with the shortage of, we don't have 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
No, you've only got 3.
Well, perhaps I can submit some of these questions for the record.
You
Mr.
absolutely
Chairman?
can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator
Mahalo.
Rono. Representative Brownlee.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Marshall, as we all watch Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians respond to Russia, who are demonstrating really great acts of heroism, I am reminded of all the heroes that you represent and who have fought bravely for our freedoms. And so today I just want to say thank you. First question I have is, in your oral testimony, Mr. Marshall, you stressed the importance of the caregiver program, which I couldn't agree with you more. I recently introduced the Elizabeth Dole Home and Community-Based Services for Veterans and Caregivers Act of 2022 to provide all veterans the ability to be at home for their care when they need it, and to stay away from institutionalized nursing home care. Over half of the veteran population today who use the VA are over 65 years of age. So I was wondering how you felt about this bill that I just introduced.
Thank you for that question, and I will yield to our legislative director, Ms. Elam.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Excellent bill. DAV is very appreciative and supports the bill. Lots of provisions in there that are going to make a real difference in veterans' lives. We need to make sure that veterans do have those home-based primary care services to continue to be able to live in their homes as they age to the extent possible. And we need to make sure that our aging veteran population, which is really going to increase over the next 20 years, that VA is prepared, both with the internal VA services that will be needed, the inpatient community living centers, our veteran state homes, as well as that home-based directed care. So we really appreciate the hard work from you and your staff on that issue, and a very thoughtful bill, and happy to have supported it.
Thank you, Ms. Elam, and thank you for your leadership. I'll stick with questions to you since I have very limited time. I know Mr. Marshall talked a lot about and stressed a lot around women veterans, sexual harassment, MST, and the need for all of that. Can you talk a little bit about where we still need to go with regards to women veterans? I know I only have about 20 seconds left, but if you could just highlight a few.
I'll make this quick then. Certainly, we appreciate all of those efforts that you've made in this regard, made a huge difference, as has both of these committees. And I think moving forward, we're seeing progress with regard to the zero tolerance policy that the Secretary has put forth, and letters that are starting to go out to every veteran. I've received one myself for those that use the VA healthcare system. That's a great first step. We're going to need Congress to continue to do oversight. This has been a longstanding issue, so we will be, though, behind you to make that happen.
Thank you, Ms. Elam, and I yield back, Senator. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Marshall, and all of your team for being with us today. We really appreciate your insightful and really powerful testimony. I want to focus on one aspect of your testimony, the exposure to toxic substances. And you summarized very well how this nation after World War II ignored radiation and mustard gas exposure, Agent Orange after the Vietnam War, and now burn pits, contaminated water at Camp Lejeune and in Hawaii at the Red Hill fuel tank. Again and again and again, the nation has delayed far too long, literally decades, in recognizing the effects of these toxic substances on the long-term lifetime health of our veterans. And I think very few Americans realize that there's that 5-year limit right now without the recognition of eligibility. So let me ask you, sir, Commander Marshall, how do we mobilize America? Can we get the faces and voices? Can you provide us with people whose names and backgrounds of service and the harms they've suffered as a result of these toxic substances?
You know, it's unfortunate that it took so long for Agent Orange exposure to be recognized, and that veterans had died before that law was actually passed due to some of the presumptive disabilities. But I will yield to our Executive Director, Mr. Reese, for further detailed comment.
Well, thank you for the question. And, you know, today in the Department of Veterans Affairs, there exists a host of registries for purposes of those who believe that they've been harmed by toxic substances to go out and register so that there is at least a longitudinal study that can be conducted based upon the information that they provide. It's unfortunate that oftentimes we put veterans' illnesses and injuries in context of just combat. These are things that happen right here on our home shores, and as catastrophic as it can be. And sometimes we think, well, you know, we'll do the best that we can by giving health care, and that's great, and we appreciate the advances in moving forward with health care. But the bottom line is then we deprive them and impoverish them because it's not delivering the food, clothing, and shelter that we would expect. Their economic impairments due to the fact that they can't provide for their family is devastating, and that leads to people to making hasty decisions, homelessness, and suicide. So we got to address this once and for all as a total package. And that's why we're back in the PACT Act, and that's why all the toxic exposures need to be addressed, not just those in the combat theater.
Thanks for your excellent testimony, and we're going to carry forward this effort. I'm leading the bill bipartisan on K2, and my thanks to my colleagues and to you for highlighting this issue. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cassidy.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commander, a couple of facts that I've learned, and I think they're still up to date, but if not, they can't be that out of date, that most veteran suicides occur within 6 months of separation. Now, we've discussed this with VA, and they've given us an account of a very impressive kind of warm handoff as people leave the service and they are kind of ushered into the VA services. Now, one thing that kind of is contrary to that, I'm told that the average delay between separation and the first appointment within the VA is 6 months, but that's also the period in which there's a higher rate of suicide. So your legislative materials highlights the needs for improved mental health services. Do you have an impression of the adequacy of that first 6 months after separation? What is being done to identify those that might be at risk of suicide and giving them the services proactively?
Well, I believe now that some are being diagnosed with PTSD upon leaving the military, which did not happen in my era when I served. But I will yield to Ms. Elam for detailed response.
Excellent question. I think the warm handoffs are really important, and VA's public health model is essential. We need to educate family members, spouses, and friends. If a veteran needs help and starts to have challenges right away, being able to spot the red flags, getting them the help they need early at the time when they need it is essential. There has to be a collaboration between DOD and VA, which we understand they're trying to do more of that, but it's not quite there yet. So it's a great question for reducing suicide. We also have to have, veterans may not come to the VA first and foremost. We need to maybe get them there, but the community grants program that is just going to be coming forward based on legislation passed last year, we're really looking to see, can that make a difference to meet them wherever they are, if they're in the community, but joining an organization like DAV or other service organizations, so critical to being surrounded by people that are going to look out for your welfare.
Okay. Well, I'm almost out of time. I thank you all for your service, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The
yield.
Congressman from Montana, Representative Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to dive right in. Mr. Marshall, we have invested somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.7 billion and appropriated that for the electronic health records system. The ranking member on the Technology Modernization Subcommittee. And this is a critical part of being able to deliver health care to our veterans, to make sure we have this smooth transition from the benefits that they generated while they were in active military and what they're going to receive. Are you familiar with this rollout that they have tried to begin at Spokane Hospital?
Unfortunately, sir, I am not, but our executive director, Mr. Reese, is.
Okay, Mr. Reese, are you familiar with the rollout that they attempted in Spokane?
I am.
Okay, are you satisfied with the 18 months of rollout that they have? The Cerner Corporation, who is managing that, are you satisfied with their performance?
We've met with both the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Cerner Corporation in regards to some of the false start pieces that happened there. Certainly, I think it was a great effort on behalf of the Secretary to stop the process, do a pause, take a look, find out what was off the tracks, and to start that program back up. I do think that the issues that were there, unfortunately, with any large modernization project you're going to have some of, but some of it came down to the basics. You got to make sure that you have a product, that you train the people, and then you work with them through execution, and some of those were fatally flawed.
So are you satisfied with that rollout?
We are not satisfied with that rollout.
Okay, so what we had were assurances from Secretary McDonough that this was not going to be introduced at any other of the 179 facilities around this country until Spokane was fully functional. Is Spokane fully functional right now?
Spokane has, again, it has a long list of logistical challenges that still face there.
That's what I thought.
Now,
Okay,
there
so
is a
are
second
you
prong.
familiar with the 500 safety violation claims that have been introduced in Spokane?
I am not familiar with the safety claims.
Okay, there's over 500 safety violation claims that have been attributed specifically to the deficiencies that the Cerner organization has been responsible for because of the failures in their system. Would you be in favor of supporting Secretary McDonough's assurances to us that they will not be rolled out in other facilities until it is fully functional in Spokane?
Well, I absolutely think that the health and safety of our nation's veterans has to come before everything else. And if they can't get it right at one place, they certainly shouldn't spread that as a disease to another.
I greatly appreciate that. Mr. Chair, I am right on my button. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. Mr. Marshall, thank you for being here today and for your continued advocacy on behalf of our veterans. I wanted to ask about the experience your members are having with the Caregivers Program. As you know, the expansion of the program is behind schedule, but the plan is to complete Phase 2 expansion by October 1st. I'm already hearing from families in Washington State that are being dropped from this program, and I've been pushing the VA since the department first proposed those regulations under the previous administration to fix the eligibility criteria to prevent families from losing access to this critical program. I wanted to know what you are hearing from your members in regards to navigating this existing program.
Well, as I said in my testimony, 86% are denied in the original applications. And now they are being reviewed. Those who were found eligible are now being reviewed and having their subsistence allowance reduced or completely eliminated based upon VHA. But Mr. Marsalek, you have further comments?
Thank you, Commander. As the Commander mentioned, 86% of the denial rate. There's something clearly wrong. We're confident this doesn't reflect the congressional intent of the program when it was first created, nor when it was expanded. Secretary McDonough has expressed serious concern with the implementation of it. So this is very concerning to us. And, you know, we urge the committee to continue working with VA, DAV, and other veterans organizations supporting caregivers to ensure this invaluable program has the proper rules and resources to meet our nation's veterans' needs. Now, we do believe there are some good things once you're in the program. For one, you got to get in, you got to stay in. And I think the eligibility is a significant concern at this point. And now, the recent court decision that allows caregivers to appeal their decisions to VA, to the Board of Veterans' Appeals, is another implementation issue that we have to figure out. And all this is very concerning now that we're going to open it up in October to all veterans of all eras. So it's very important that we work together to figure out a solution here. And we believe that a summit is needed with all the stakeholders, VSOs, VA, everybody at the table. And I go back to the Appeals Modernization Act on how successful that was, the implementation of it, and how it's benefiting veterans today. If you get everybody together at the table to figure out a solution, I think we could work together to figure out what's best for the veterans and their caregivers.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm determined, and I hope the committee is to work with you, all of you on that. And I just have a few seconds left. Let me just mention that I am really concerned about the personal sacrifices of children in military families that are going unnoticed. The Elizabeth Dole Foundation found that 2.3 million children under the age of 18 live with a veteran who's disabled. And the responsibilities for caring for an injured parent, as some children do, can be pretty tough on kids. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can have a discussion with all of our reps here, and I'm out of time for me today. But I want to find out how we can be helpful in making sure children who shoulder caregiving responsibilities in veterans households also receive the support that they need. Thank you.
Representative Pappas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Commander Marshall and the leadership of DAV for your strong testimony here today. And a quick shout out to anyone from New Hampshire DAV who may be watching. Thanks for all that you do. I wanted to bring up the issue of PFAS contamination as we think about the Honoring Our Pact Act. I know that I have an Air Force base in my district, Pease, that has seen significant contamination from the AFFF, where PFAS has got into the groundwater and into the environment. It has made individuals sick. So as we think about the risks of PFAS, which are widely accepted nationwide in terms of health studies, we have no way of connecting everyone who may have been exposed, not just on the base in my district, but hundreds of others across the country and around the world. And we need to be providing them with the information that they need about these health impacts. So I've introduced legislation, the PFAS Registry Act. It's included in the Honoring Our Pact Act. It directs VA to establish a health registry for current or past members of the armed forces who may have been exposed to PFAS. So I heard you reference health registries earlier. I'm wondering, Commander, if you think that veterans would benefit from a centralized registry where they could access health information, research updates, other resources, specifically as it pertains to PFAS?
You know, the VA's health records, you can walk in any VA facility and they can instantly bring up your health record. You cannot do that in private facilities. But you know, that is an important issue with DAV, and I will ask Mr. Marszalek, our service director, to respond to that further.
Thank you, Commander. And a great question. They certainly could benefit from a registry. The more we can do to be proactive in reaching out to these veterans who were exposed to these contaminants, the better off we're going to be. And the more information we can provide them about those exposures and what illnesses may be associated with them, the more educated they're going to be about them. So creating a registry is a great idea.
Well, thanks very much for that answer. And in the remaining time I have, I wanted to address the issue of LGBTQ plus veterans. I know that in your testimony, you indicated that VA needs to take additional steps to ensure that there's a welcoming, inclusive environment where all veterans feel comfortable accessing care. We've got legislation called the SERV Act, which looks to build upon the steps that VA has taken recently to make good on connecting veterans with care and benefits who may have been caught up in don't ask, don't tell. And I'm wondering if you have any specific thoughts on the LGBTQ veteran population, your members, and additional steps we might need to take to make sure that they have the care and benefits that they deserve.
Well, sexual harassment has no place in our country, especially for veterans. And I will ask our legislative director for further comments.
Thank you, Commander. Absolutely. The findings from one of the reports about sexual harassment in VA facilities was a real eye-opener. Many women veterans would have told you this has been happening for some time, and we are pleased with the administration that the Secretary is making this a top priority to have a safe and welcoming environment for all veterans. So our LGBTQ veterans, our minority veterans, everyone should be able to walk into a facility and not expect to be harassed, because that we know is a barrier to care. They're not going to return to get the best care and the care that they need if they're not afraid to go to VA or they have a horrible experience. So it's a first good start, but it's going to need, again, that public model where we know our membership is part of the solution, and we want to educate our members. If they see harassment, say something, alert the VA staff, and put an end to this so that all veterans have the opportunity to have the greatest care available.
Thanks very much. I yield back.
Representative Miller Meeks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I am unmuted.
You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Takano. And, you know, I'm as a 24-year military veteran, I was really proud to put forward increased funding for the Vet Tech program last year. And as you know, we increased funding for the Vet Tech pilot program from $15 million a year to $45 million a year to allow more eligible veterans to participate. This was also a program that was highlighted to me as a member of the Wapello County Veterans Commission, as a commissioner on my local board, which unfortunately had to resign from that as a member of Congress. But the program provides veterans with the opportunity to use a GI Bill style benefits to participate in short-term training programs for jobs in the IT industry. The program has been extremely successful with a graduation rate of 87% and has a 72% job placement rate. What feedback have you received on the pilot program, and could you please identify any improvements that are needed to help more veterans access the program?
Thank you for your comments and support for that bill. And I'll ask our Executive Director, Mr. Reese, to respond.
Thank you for the question, and I will tell you that the Undersecretary for Benefits, Tom Murphy, and the Principal Deputy Undersecretary, Mike Frew, speak very highly of the program, the efficiency of the program, and the cost share. And that's what makes this program great is, you know, you get into an actual career path And some of the responsibility is on the school, some of the responsibility is on the government, and there's responsibility on the student to be successful. And the further you go, you get success in the end from all three parties. We use a similar program for purposes through vocational rehabilitation and education, or our training, for our national service officers. And we think that this is a great program, especially for a direct career path into one of the leading industries in America. So nothing but thumbs up from us.
Great, thank you so much for that. And it's one of the few programs that as a pilot goes on to be extremely successful. So I appreciate the program. I know my veterans appreciate the program.
Representative, are we done, Representative Miller? Okay, Representative Mervan.
Thank you, Chairman. One, I want to thank the DAV for your service and what you've done. I want to thank Donald Peake, the past state commander of Indiana, who I met with earlier, and Kevin Cooley, the state adjutant, for sharing with me your concerns. And I also, Mr. Marshall, the DAV is a current user of the Veteran Benefits Management System, as we know from the independent budget recommendations for the VA. That modernization of this system is a priority for you. What is the current state of the system, and how is that impacting your ability to assist veterans with access to benefits? And secondly, is the VBMS technologically equipped to handle and anticipate the influx of toxic exposure claims following the anticipated congressional action on this issue?
That's an interesting question, sir. And, you know, the VBMS, it was about right before I retired as a veterans advocate that came into existence, and that was an amazing advancement to what they had previously. But for further comments, Mr. Marszalek?
Thank you, Commander. Great question. When I first got to Washington, D.C., I had the opportunity to work alongside VA as a VSO and provide the VSO perspective. So I actually went over to VA and worked there for 30 days when they created VBMS and provided the perspective of VSOs and what should be in it, how it should work, what it should look like. And so I think we need to do that again. There certainly needs to be modernization of the system. The system's over 12 years old. So it's certainly at end of life. So the more we can do, and again, working automation in some parts of that will be key. Allowing veterans potential access to their records. You can do that in VHA, you can't do it in VBA. You still got to do a FOIA request inside VBA. They should have access. We should be able to file claims more easily electronically, a single source for veterans to come in and file for benefits. So I certainly think that working together, and again, I think that's crucial here, is that the collaboration has to be there so we can provide that perspective, and you get all the stakeholders in a room together, working together to build a system that works for everybody. Over the years, there's been many asks by VSOs for different things in VBMS that just didn't happen because there was no money for it inside VA. And you know, obviously their priorities take priority over the representatives sometimes. And I think we need to do a better job of that, of getting the representatives the access and the tools they need to work inside that system as well. They did just recently integrate the VBMS notification queue where we receive our notifications electronically inside of VBMS. And so that has been a really welcomed new feature of the system.
I thank you for that answer. And as chairman of the Technology Modernization Committee, I want you to know that we will be committed to working in that collaborative effort to be able to achieve those goals that provide world-class benefits to our veterans. I thank you, and I yield back.
Representative Trifilis McCormick.
Thank you so much, DAV, for the work that you've done. I was able to tour some of your facilities in Florida, and I know some great work that you guys are doing. We look forward to helping you however we can. But I have a question about the DEA. The Secretary has taken several important steps during the past year to ensure that the department is welcoming to all veterans, no matter what their gender, race, sexual orientation, or background. Last summer, VA completed the department-wide review by the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access, or the IDEA task force, which came up with a number of very useful recommendations towards improving inclusion and equity. Could you provide us with any updates of those recommendations and how they've been implemented?
Well, thank you for the question, and I'll answer on behalf of the National Commander. You know, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about leadership from the top. And I think that this administration did an overall review. They set the standard, if you will, on day one of the administration, and they're going in the right direction. But for a detailed deep dive, I'll ask our National Legislative Director, Joy Elam.
We were very pleasantly surprised early on in the administration to be invited with some one-on-one, really almost with the secretary, with small groups of people, women veterans, veterans that had experienced sexual trauma, veterans that had had some barriers and problems and challenges using VA services, and met succinctly, you know, a couple months apart, just to advise us on what VA is doing. And they certainly have made, I think, strides in moving in that direction, especially with regard to their Veterans Experience Office. I think that office is going to be key, continue to be key, because it really does focus groups. They need to talk to veterans with real-life experience using the system. So I think they're moving forward. There's still a long way to go, a lot of work to do, but very pleased with first steps.
Thank you so much for answering that question. And I would love to get more information as we go forward on how that implementation is going. Any utilization rates of who's actually using the services, that would be a great starting point for us to understand if there's any more help we can do in ensuring that everyone has access. So thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Representative Sablin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Commander Marshall, for joining us today. Welcome to you and your colleagues, sir. Thank you for all that DAV does for veterans. Commander, you noted in testimony that noted in your testimony the many barriers and inequities facing minority veteran populations. You mentioned that one key to understand barriers and inequities is giving voice directly to the underserved population. My bipartisan bill, HR 3730, passed by the House last year, provides a voice to veterans living in the U.S. territories and the freely associated states by establishing a dedicated advisory committee within the VA. The advisory committee would provide recommendations to the VA secretary to address the disparities in service and health outcomes, which are great in greater numbers and have not been looked at. But would the disabled American veterans be willing to support HR 3730, Commander?
Interesting question, sir. And thank you for that question. I will yield to our Legislative Director, Ms. Elam, for that response.
Thank you, Commander. We do believe that advisory committees are an important way to ensure that VA is taking into account all veterans' challenges for using the system, gaps that are in services, and you've been a tireless advocate on this issue to make sure that all veterans' voices, especially in remote areas, are heard. And we certainly want to be able to support moving that ball forward. The essential piece, I think, is listening to those veterans, making sure that we understand the unique challenges that they face. You've brought a number of these forward, and we're happy to help move that forward for you.
Thank you very much. I'll take that as a yes. Thank you. I yield back.
Representative Gallego. You better unmute yourself, Ruben.
No, the host has to unmute me.
I liked it better muted, but go ahead.
Yeah, you and a lot of other people in Arizona. Mr. Marshall, in your testimony, you discussed the fact that while disabled Black and Latino veterans use VA services disproportionately, there are still inequities in their access to care. In your opinion, what is the single most important step Congress can take to close that gap?
I don't know if there's a single most important, but I will let Mr. Reese reply to that.
We'll take the top three then.
Well, I do believe that you got to know the information. And right now, as COVID showed us that there was disparities throughout care in the system, not a deliberate attempt to do that, but the reality was, once you looked at the information, you came to that conclusion. So I think better research, understanding, and again, that research and understanding has to take in the diversity of the veterans population as it exists today. Not the past, but how we're delivering care today, and who can get the access to those care and benefits, and what the deliverables are in the form of outcomes. It does no good at all to be able to access it and have poor outcomes, or not be able to access it at all. So the only way we can put the whole package together, are they getting what they need in a timely manner, in a quality manner, and having favorable outcomes, is to make sure we've got the data behind it, the research behind it.
Thank you. I also want to thank the DAV for endorsing my bill, the Restore Veterans Compensation Act, and thank your legislative team for its help in making sure veterans receive their full VA disability payments. Our bill would end the practice of forcing veterans to pay back their administrative separation pay before they receive VA disability benefits. Can you expand a little bit about why it's harmful to deduct benefits from veterans who qualify for VA disability?
I will yield again to Mr. Reese.
Well, as you know, the whole scheme of the Department of Veterans Affairs is to make a veteran whole. And once we have concluded that a veteran has a disability and is not whole, it is the obligation of the nation to make them as whole as possible. And part of that is economic relief. Economic relief in the form of financial payments to offset their industrial impairments caused by their injuries or disease. In the event that somebody got out of service and received whatever form of severance, and then they're found to be disabled, which should have certainly happened in transition, but oftentimes we find that down the road, to go back and take that money at the same time that we know that they already are disadvantaged from their counterparts in the private sector, that is certainly something that we have to consider. There should be no offset there, because if the DOD and the VA cooperated to start with, that veteran should have never left service with a service-connected disability and had to receive the severance pay. So we need to fix that. And I'll add one thing that's not a part of this bill, but you know, we talked about concurrent receipt for those who were injured and became ill in combat. And this chamber said, hey, well, we're going to phase that in. Well, we got to 50% and the phasing stopped. So, you know, the phased in approach just is not really delivered for our nation's veterans. So we've got to do better.
Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Moran and Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Bost for holding this hearing and these presentations today. And I want to thank all of our witnesses. I am deeply appreciative of DAV's service and advocacy on behalf of Granite State veterans and veterans all across the country. So this is a question to Mr. Marshall. In 2021, DAV's transportation network provided more than 163,000 rides to VA healthcare facilities. Granite State veterans, especially from the rural parts of my state, consistently share with me that transportation often represents a significant barrier to getting care at the VA. DAV's Department of New Hampshire does an incredible job at helping to reduce this barrier to care, and I want to thank all of the volunteers who make this service possible. But knowing how vital transportation is for veterans needing VA care, what can the VA and Congress do to support DAV's transportation network to help meet veterans' needs?
Well, unfortunately, the COVID pandemic caused some issues with transportation because of social distancing. We could not transport as many veterans in a transportation vehicle as we could in the past prior to COVID, but I will ask our Voluntary Services Director, Mr. Kleindienst, to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, ma'am. The Transportation Network is a remarkable program that DAV overtook in 1987. COVID-19 did put a drastic impact on this program. I think it's an imperative that we have a consistent practice across the board for onboarding our volunteers and making it a timely priority at VA to recognize these people who are willing to dedicate their time and efforts to transporting veterans to their medical appointments. If we were to make a streamlined process consistent across the country, we can improve this process and recruit individuals who'd be willing to donate their time.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
We're going to do a second round of questions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to participate, so I'll turn the gavel over to Chairman Takano. Go, you may proceed.
I do see Mr. Lamb. Did Mr. Lamb have his time yet?
He had no questions.
Oh, no questions. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Tester. I just have a few questions. Ms. Elam, in your response to Senator Cassidy's question related to the suicides that occur in the first 6 months, I'm wondering if eVest, the bill that passed the House with 44 Republicans voting in favor of it, might also be relevant to addressing the suicides that occur within the first 6 months of separation.
Yes, I think that it could definitely be, have a positive impact. So, definitely be able to, we've offered our support for that.
Yeah, and so, of course, eVest is an opt-out provision, which instead of having veterans having to opt in by enrolling, we automatically enroll them. And we capture quite a number of veterans who ordinarily would not have been enrolled in VA. And of course, we know that the more connected that veterans are to VA, the less likely they are to die by suicide. Commander, in your testimony, you note the years of data showing that community mental health providers are not as well trained as VA providers to treat veterans with PTSD, suicidality, histories of sexual assault, and traumatic brain injury. You make a compelling case for legislation I'm trying to advance to mandate free online training in evidence-based treatments for VA's community mental health providers. Can you tell my colleagues here today why it is so vital that we require Mission Act network providers to be better trained? I mean, the mental health providers.
Thank you for that question. Years ago, veterans were discharged. They had the VA for mental health care, but the VA nor the public was equipped for post-traumatic stress disorder treatment until the vet centers were established, and the DAV was the main driving force behind that establishment of the vet centers. And we even had our service officers travel around the country and provide training not only to VA, but the public on PTSD. And I will let Ms. Elam provide further details.
An excellent point and so critical. Every veteran should be able to expect the same quality of care if they have to go to the community to get it. We know VA has the expertise. They're the main provider we want them to see, especially if they have PTSD. But in cases where they do go to the community, having that training is so important. We do need to, I think, work with VA to figure out how, that is extensive training that VA does. They're, for evidence-based treatments, there's a mentoring phase, there's a lot to, that goes along with that. But it's a great idea, and I think we should work towards that. That's what you want to see, that network tightly linked to VA.
Well, thank you, Ms. Elam. And let me just add that I recall several years ago, VA making a very important correction in terms of how it dealt with opioids after having had several terrible incidents around the country. And they implemented this, a much more stringent prescription policy among its own providers. Unfortunately, the administrative policies that they set within VHA did not extend to the community care network. And so the opioid sorts of restrictions and rules and regulations that our own VA providers were obligated to observe did not extend to the community care providers. So it's not just training, but it's also the type of guidelines that and actual policies that our internal providers have to follow. I believe that we need to find ways in which those policies extend out to our community care providers. Does any other member, Senator Sinema. Senator Sinema, and then I'll call on Mr. Banks. Senator Sinema, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. Commander Marshall, thank you for your service to this nation and for the service your organization does for America's veterans. I want to acknowledge DAV for your support of the Ensuring Survivor Benefits during COVID legislation that I introduced with Senator Tillis. We introduced our legislation after hearing concerns from family members who lost a veteran to COVID and were worried that they wouldn't receive the survivor benefits they'd earned because the death certificate did not list service-connected illnesses as a contributing cause of death. We know that people with underlying conditions are more at risk for COVID, so it makes sense that service-connected illnesses should be considered as a contributing cause of death. I also want to say thank you to Chairman Tester, who helped pass our bill out of the Senate Veterans Committee and to pass out of the full Senate. And Chairman Takano, I hope that you and your House colleagues will move to pick it up soon. My first question is following up on Senator Murray's question regarding the Family Caregiver Program. Commander Marshall, my office has been hearing from Arizona veterans and caregivers with concerns about the VA's implementation of the VA Mission Act. Congress was proud to expand the Family Caregiver Program, but that has not been the experience for those 6,700 legacy caregivers who participated as post 9/11 veterans and are now being removed from the program. So my first question is, do you believe those legacy participants needed the support of the Family Caregiver Program?
Interesting question. It is essential that they receive all the support necessary for Family Caregiver Program. And Mr. Reese?
Thank you for the question, and they absolutely did. I mean, we're talking about two schemes, as you will, of articulating different versions of eligibility. So the first version of eligibility was based on activities of daily living. It was a single, and it was for the entire totality of the program supports. And then when we did the second expansion and a new IT system, they basically created a whole new rule set in which they're merging the first with the second. And as you know, there was difficulties in that eligibility piece in the first program to the degree that this chamber asked the secretary, and the secretary acquiesced with actually suspending any further discharges from the program pending review. We had hoped that that second set of regulations would have clarified for consistency and application of those who apply for those benefits. Unfortunately, it has caused a greater complexity, and it has actually caused great concern across the country that those who are in legacy that might be removed from the program, or those who have applied at 86% are being turned away from a program. Because after all, I think everybody here understands we're talking about our nation's most catastrophically disabled veterans. It's a sad day, but unfortunately it is the front door that's the problem. The program itself does wonderful supports for our veterans.
Well, thank you. To follow up, what can be done to protect those families who have been relying on this program for years and are now being dropped from the rolls?
Well, our understanding is, speaking with the secretary, he has certainly put a review process in place. He has actually dedicated the resources of the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs to put together a review to make sure that these are actually analyzed before those final discharges are actually taking place. And in addition, for the second phase or second set of rules, they have extended the deadline for making discharges into 2023. So I think the oversight is the key piece. I think the administration gets the first bite at that apple, but if it fails, we'll be back in this chamber to tell you that we have to fix it.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I know that my time has expired. I want to thank Commander Marshall and others for testifying today. I do have some follow-up questions, so I will submit those for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Senator Sinema, and I'm happy to tell you that the Health Care for Burn Pit Veterans Act, which you passed out of the Senate, is in Title I of the PACT Act, and we'll be debating that tomorrow, and thank you so much. I now call
Chairman, I just want to thank you for that. I really appreciate it. We are proud to see the burn pits bill go through. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the DAV for being with us today. Appreciate all that you do and your leadership. Wondering, Commander Marshall, if you could talk for a moment about the main problems that you see regarding rural veterans and their ability to travel to receive care, and how can Congress better address some of those issues for our rural veterans?
Well, rural veterans' access to care, in those states, when you're not populated and you have to travel to the nearest VA system, which may be over 100 miles away, and now with the Mission Act, they can schedule you closer. But for further response, Ms. Elam?
For rural veterans, there's always been a problem in terms of access to health care. Just those communities, it's very hard to attract and have resources available there to meet all their health care needs. And I think the Office of Rural Health in VA, since that has been established, a number of pilots that have been very successful in coordinating care with the community. But I know, we know that a high percentage of veterans who use VA healthcare are living in rural communities. With the advent of really increasing telehealth, we do see some promising outlook, but we really need to make sure that that care is effective for them. And I know VA's very interested in that, given the pandemic for the past 2 years, and how that's really expanded care in rural communities. But there's still a lot of work to do. Technology will help, but there's still need for transportation to make sure we can get veterans to the care they need.
I appreciate that feedback. Commander Marshall, one last question for you. What do some of your members think about the Mission Act? And can you give us some advice on what Congress can do to improve on the program?
Well, thank you for the question. And as you know, the Mission Act, when it was implemented, had some very stern criteria. By definition, the actual acronym mission, maintaining internal systems and strengthening integrated outside networks. You know, sometimes when we look across the VA system as a whole, we see that the Department of Veterans Affairs wants to go one way or the other, and sometimes that's resource-driven. We have to do both. The internal systems is the key component. We have to have a strong backbone of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for multiple missions. That's make sure that we educate those new clinicians that are, and we're talking about the entire healthcare provision in the United States. We also have to make sure we got a backup, a contingency for emergencies in the United States. We have to deliver the healthcare for our veterans, and we have to do so in a timely manner. And then we have to be, significantly considerate of all the resources. So we've got the AIR Act that's bearing down. So regardless of how long those processes take to stand up, we can't stop maintaining the internal U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. So we've got to get the infrastructure fixed. We've got to make sure veterans have a place to go, get care in a prompt and timely manner at the high standards in which we expect to receive from the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you again. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Mervan.
Commander Marshall, I understand that providers in VA's community care network may not be equipped to provide evidence-based treatments for survivors of military sexual trauma. Recognizing that women veterans, many of whom are MST survivors, are highly dependent on community care, I find this deeply concerning. In your view, is the Veterans Culturally Competent Care Act, critical legislation introduced by my colleague, Representative Blunt Rochester, sufficient to address these issues, since it mandates brief, free, and online training and treatment in treating MST and other conditions? If not, what additional authorities or resources are needed to ensure MST survivors receive evidence-based treatment regardless of where they receive their care?
Well, if they were subject to MST while in active duty, that should have been the last time that happened to them. Should not happen in the VA system or any other system, but I'll let Ms. Elam respond.
It is essential that veterans, especially those that have experienced sexual trauma, have access to that state-of-the-art evidence-based treatment. It's very lengthy. There's a training period that's required. And while the legislation definitely is a step in the right direction, we're going to need VA to also make incentives for those community network providers to want to take that training and to follow through on the mentoring process that goes with it. And that is truly the only way we're going to ensure that if a veteran has to seek care outside from a private community provider that's within the network, that they're going to get the state-of-the-art treatments that are available to them. So I think it's a great step, first step, and we're going to have to work with VA to make sure that they have the providers that can provide that training as well and do the follow-up and the mentoring.
May I ask, you had mentioned just from your level incentives. Can you drill down and kind of give me examples of what incentives you might be talking about?
Well, I had asked VA that question actually, and that's where I'm coming from on that, because I said, what are you going to try to do if you can't mandate it? It's not in their contracts for community providers. And, VA noted we're looking at some incentives, and we've agreed to do a roundtable discussion with VA to look at what some of those incentives could be to really move those providers. What could it be that's going to encourage them to want to take that route? So I think, facilitating some discussion on that would be excellent in the months ahead for this session.
I thank you very much, and I yield back at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commander Marshall. I want to go into the educational benefits for our veterans right now. Dating back to the first GI Bill, the recruiters and the veterans have relied heavily on that benefit. It's been very good for all of us. It's been good for the nation. And it has come to my attention that a lot of the educational facilities now are having problems because the VA has made a determination that they're going to start recognizing any assistance that a veteran receives, whether it's from the VA or whether it's from the school itself, as assistance when they evaluate the 85-15 rule as far as the ratio of students that they are allowed to accept into that facility. 85% cannot be supported by Veterans Administration, and 15% can be. And if they can't go beyond that 15% number. I think most of y'all would agree that virtually every student receives some kind of assistance. And so if we change the interpretation of that simple rule, then we are going to eliminate the ability for a lot of veterans to attend educational facilities, and we're going to eliminate a lot of educational facilities. Is anybody aware on this panel that that is taking place, that the Veterans Administration is looking at changing that interpretation?
I'm not aware of that, but that wouldn't be something that we would be open to taking benefits away from veterans based upon that they've earned through their service.
Okay, so what I would ask is, can I then count on you and this panel to give me support to make sure that we revert that interpretation back to the traditional recognition of assistance, that it would come only from the Veterans Administration, and that would go towards that 15% number?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. The next thing I would like to ask Commander is that when we spoke about the burn pits and the exposure, and it is a terrible thing. I have a lot of cancer in my family, so I've seen both the emotional and financial hardships that it causes, been very close to it. We need to define the exposure, we need to define the conditions, and then we can start delivering treatment. And this is something, in your words, that we have precious time to lose, and I agree with you. So wouldn't it be beneficial for the House to go in this week and pass the legislation that the Senate has already passed down to us, instead of going back and forth, so that we could start delivering benefits immediately?
Yes, sir. As I said in my testimony, it's time to work together to bring this issue to the forefront and get it passed.
And again, with having a piece of legislation from the Senate that's been approved, wouldn't it be beneficial to have the House pass that today?
Well, I think the biggest concern that we have is that is a great step forward, first of all. And there's great legislation on both sides of the aisle in both chambers today that both acknowledges these conditions exist, acknowledges the concession of exposure, and that we're willing to move forward with. And that's great because, again, we've got 40 years from the Vietnam, 30 years from the first Gulf War, and 20 years from the last wars. It's time to act. However, and when we're looking at the PACT Act, it incorporates that into it. It delivers a comprehensive plan that delivers more benefits for all generations. And it also delivers more than just health care because, again, in the portfolio that's designed.
Mr. Reese, look, I understand. We can always do better. There's nothing that we can't do better. Wouldn't it be beneficial to the veterans that are out there literally dying right now for us to pass that Senate legislation this week so that we could start delivering some treatment?
It would be wonderful if we passed the PACT Act that incorporates that legislation.
I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. I think all members who have asked questions on the second round have asked those questions, and I'm now prepared to bring us to a close, and I have a closing statement. I would like to thank all the representatives from DAV again for coming to the Hill today to participate in this joint hearing. Your participation and insights into the needs and priorities of the veteran community are invaluable to our work. Your overwhelming support of the PACT Act is going to be integral to it passing the House this week with bipartisan support, and will help to keep the momentum going as we work with our colleagues in the Senate to make this law. I'd also like to express my thanks again to Senator Tester for his continued efforts to work with me on the issue. Toxic exposed veterans have held up their part of the pact, and they deserve our action. This week, we are keeping our promise, and I look forward to continuing our work with the Senate to deliver comprehensive toxic exposure legislation to the President's desk to be signed into law. And with that, the formal part of this committee hearing is, the joint session is now adjourned.